Hi folks, you're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about something I've touched on a few times before, which is how the entire Western legal system has been largely subverted, certainly at local, district, and even federal court level. And it's only the very upper courts, the superior courts of appeal, the Supreme Court of the United States. It's only at that level that you don't have the subversion that's fully in effect. But subversion happens in two ways. And bear in mind, the entire legal system of the Western world, the globalists have sought and largely have successfully turned it to their own ends. The legal system now exists in large part, and some areas in totality, exists simply to implement the globalist project and to crush all dissent to the implementation of that project. That is now the sole purpose of the legal system, and the globalists have fashioned it that way to suit their own purposes. But it happens in two ways. One is they appoint activists, radical activists into judicial positions. But in the other side, they also have taken over the administration of the court. So all the administration officers, the court managers, the clerks that file the cases, all that's all been taken over by the globalists as well. So they're all activists, and they make sure that that activist judges are appointed to certain cases, sensitive cases. So, for example, in Australia, someone's arrested, say, for doing a climate change protest, which brings the whole city to a standstill, blocking traffic, that sort of thing, bomb threats maybe even, and they bring the whole city to a standstill. And this is a decent-sized city of 5+ million people, and they get arrested and they get dragged in front of the court, and yet somehow magically the judge who's appointed to hear the case is a super pro climate change activist. And not only lets the person free, sets them free, so no jail time, nothing, sets them free, but the judge from the bench, while the case is on, actually congratulates the person for their activism. I mean, can you even imagine this? This is the insanity. Someone has brazenly broken, a gazillion laws, and the judge not only says, who cares, but congratulates them on their activism because you're fighting back against Nazis. The judge says this. The judge, someone who has sworn, taken an oath to uphold the law and the Constitution, is congratulating the law-breaking activist. Now, on top of that, the activist also has all their legal fees paid. They're not out of pocket even one penny. They're actually employed as a consultant for a climate change NGO, and so they're being paid a salary they otherwise wouldn't have. And this is someone who's too stupid to get a job like that on merit. They get a salary, all their legal expenses, their travel expenses, their accommodation expenses, everything is paid for by the NGO who is behind the activism, and there's no secondary legal case going against the NGO for funding this and organising it. So in effect, that the entire apparatus, the court administration, which judge gets to hear which case, all this sort of thing is controlled now by the globalists, again, across most courts and at many, many levels. And on top of that, the majority of the people, if not nearly all of the people that are in the court administration, again, the managers, the administrators, the clerks, and so on, they are all former employees of the very NGOs, the activist NGOs, whether it's social justice or climate change or race hustling or whatever, it doesn't matter. They're all from that same crowd. It's a conga line of fucking activists going into the court and working in the administration, judges' assistants, clerking for the judge and all this sort of thing. So it's hardly an independent or impartial. Now, there was a time when if activists applied of any flavour, applied for a job at a court, whether again it's a court administrator or anything like that, they just couldn't get a job. I mean, you just wouldn't employ them. No, you're an activist. We want people who are completely impartial and who will uphold the law and the Constitution, and you've sworn an oath to uphold these things, that sort of thing. That would be an absolute requirement, but no longer. The only requirement now to be a judge is, are you a radical pro-globalist activist? Do you believe we're all surrounded by Nazis? Do you believe that any measure necessary to stop Nazis is acceptable, up to and including rigging a court case and planting false evidence, and all this sort of thing. Tearing up the due legal process provisions. And there's now judges, gazillions of them are out there all across the Western world to believe it's okay. No, it's okay to tear up the rules of evidence, and it's okay to ignore judicial. It's okay to ignore habeas corpus. It's okay to ignore all of this sort of stuff. And why is it okay to ignore it? Because we're fighting Nazis. Everything is permissible when we're fighting Nazis. So, including arbitrary arrest and all sorts of things like that. So this is all across the Western world. Now we need to understand, and apart from mass migration, we need to, I believe, reclaim the courts from mass subversion, mass globalist subversion. We need to reclaim the courts from that, because that's where it is now. Now, there's a lot of excitement over the former FBI director, who is a brazen political hack, anti-Trump and all this sort of stuff. Brazen, absolutely brazen, and thinks it's quite, in my view, thinks it's quite acceptable to engage in aggressive anti-constitutional lawfare to go chasing after Trump. If you can't get him on something you did, just fucking invent something. Just nail the motherfucker is pretty much, as I understand it, the attitude of James Comey, who was the director of the FBI. Now, you're director of the FBI, you're meant to be impartial. You're being paid by the taxpayer. You've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. And here's the guy, as I perceive it, at least, going on national television and saying, fuck the Constitution, fuck the law, fuck due legal process. You just go after and just nail this guy. He's a bad guy, so who cares? Who cares what we do? And this feeds into this wider narrative of it's okay to kill Nazis. This is fine. Punch a Nazi, kill a Nazi, and all of these. Anyone who voted Republican is a Nazi. So let's kill them all. Now, such hysteria is obviously not very good and not helpful, and outright dangerous in my view. But this attitude, as we can see from James Comey, has permeated the FBI, the Department of Justice, with that angry Jewish activist Merrick Garland in there, and all that sort of stuff. So the whole thing has been taken over by the globalist machine, and their sole purpose and focus, and their laser-like focus, is to fully subvert it. So it is either A, inoperable, or B, suits and has been fashioned completely to suit their purpose, which is, of course, implementing the globalist project. But the judge appointed to hear the James Comey case, which even if the guy's found guilty, I'd be surprised if it was even 12 months in prison. But nonetheless, these elite guys, they want to spend 5 minutes in prison, let alone 12 months. So, and look how keen the Democrats were to engage in lawfare to imprison anyone who was anywhere near Trump. President Trump, whether it's Roger Stone with that choreographed, coordinated dawn raid to arrest an old man in his pajamas, FBI agents swooping in with fucking body armor and automatic machine guns, and old man comes to the door and who's this? And they're all there. Dangerous criminal here. Get fucked. The media tipped off to turn it into a fucking propaganda extravaganza. So these are people who don't give a fuck about the law. I'm far from it. It's there to suit their political purposes. So the judge appointed to hear the James Comey case, this former FBI director dude, who happens to be a Biden appointed judge. Now, the whole purpose of the Biden, that 4 years, was where, and I believe, Biden, this is how dangerous these globalists are to our way of life, and to our Constitution, our laws, and everything. is they rigged the vote. Biden is supposedly the most popular, by vote tally, the most popular president ever in the history of the United States. So this doddering old man that could barely put a sentence together, didn't even campaign, and they'd only wheeled him out every week or so for a quick, short fucking speech that was practiced and on the teleprompter, and he still managed to fuck all that up. That guy supposedly didn't campaign, couldn't put a sentence together. That guy supposedly is the most popular president ever in the history of the United States, and not by a handful of votes, but by a shitload of votes. So they cooked up something in the order of 20 million votes to rig the election for Biden. And then they also, I believe, rigged 3 or 4 Senate races using the same tactics of just cooking up the votes out in the back room. And this gave them majority in the Senate, which then allowed them to appoint these activist judges. And other than 1 or 2, I think the 200 plus judges that they appointed, all of them were screaming radical activists. Some of them were activism on steroids. And they're all over. And one of those judges has been appointed to hear the James Comey case. I mean, wouldn't you know? Now, if you look at the district of the court where the judges, the chances of getting an activist judge wasn't that high, yet it's supposed to be a randomly appointed thing. This is the way it's meant to work. The next case that comes off the production line, if you like, and then the next available judge hears that case. It's quite random when because you don't know when a case is going to be finished or when it's going to be fully heard or concluded. So there's two sort of, if you like, two streams going at parallel streams, and it's quite random, or supposedly random, in that you don't know what's going to be the next case that comes off the thing, because you don't know when other cases are going to finish. The case may last a day or 2 days or 3 days or a week or whatever. Key witnesses may be sick or unavailable, all this sort of stuff. You don't know what judges are going to be available. So there's a double sort of random effect here. But this doesn't seem to have any influence on the judges that get appointed to hear the cases that the globalists believe are important. Now, the globalists want to protect Comey. They don't want Comey to go to prison because they don't want Comey going to prison to scare the other globalist flunkies and stooges and gobblers and so on that are around in the deep state. Because if Comey gets 12 months in prison, that'll scare the shit out of the others. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm prepared to do this, that, next thing, but I don't want to go to prison. So that puts a real dampener on how many stooges the globalists can mobilize and put out front. Nobody wants to go to prison, especially not those guys. So they don't want Comey to be found guilty, and they don't want him to go to prison. If he is found guilty, they want a sort of like a middle course where he gets a few weeks weekend, gets a month of weekend detention or something, just some very light slap on the wrist. Now, if you look at, say, people like, Roger Stone as an example, Peter Navarro, and others around Trump, Steve Bannon, and so on, they get 3 or 4 months or 6 months, whatever, in prison. That's no problem. That's justice. That's justice because they're buddies with Trump, so that's justice. But the globalists are happy to do that, but they don't want Comey to go to prison. So they'll do it. So somehow, magically, a Biden-appointed judge, someone who has clerked for activist judges in his career, someone who has worked for pro-democrat activist law firms, impeccable. I wouldn't call him a street placard-waving activist. I'm not sure. I couldn't find anything in a quick dive, not a deep dive into his background. But then he gets to hear the case. Now, there's no question, in my view, that he'll be completely sympathetic to Comey's position. Now, the way these judges play it when they're in court is they'll allow certain evidence and disallow it. They'll say, oh, no, that evidence is inadmissible. So if there's smoking gun evidence against Comey, oh, no, I'm ruling that as inadmissible. No, no, I'm not accepting that. So they just rule out the key vital evidence that finds Comey guilty. They just rule it out. The judge, the activist judge says, no, it's inadmissible. any attempt that the prosecution uses to bring, say, expert witnesses or expert testimony, the judge will either not allow it or will use device like they'll close the court early today. No, we're closing the court early today because, and they'll invent some bullshit reason that evidence can't be heard. They'll then say, no, I don't want the jury to hear this, and so on and so forth. And they'll go back and forth and around. And eventually they sort of wear down the prosecution by just disallowing a bit here, preventing a bit there. For example, here's another trick they use. No, we haven't got time to hear your witness for the prosecution that saw Comey with the smoking gun type thing. We don't have time for that today. Will the witness be available tomorrow? No, the witness won't be available tomorrow, Your Honour. Unless the witness is available tomorrow, I'm not prepared to allow them to give testimony. So straight just through that little device there, the judge has knocked out that key witness for the prosecution. So they do the activist judges use all these sorts of little devices and little tricks to fuck up or to protect their little stooges. And whether this judge will or won't, I don't know. But that's the sort of device they use, and that's the level of subversion that's all across the Western world. Now, when it's on the other side, where they're going after people they don't like, who haven't committed a crime, or where it's such a minor level misdemeanor that you wouldn't even bother putting it in court, you give them a $50 fine and send them home type thing. That's when they go in the complete other way. They'll invent evidence, fabricate evidence. They'll make such an insane interpretation of evidence. So you're in Washington, you were 10 miles from the Capitol, Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Well, you may have wanted to go into the Capitol on that day. So that's it. You subversive Nazi motherfucker, prison for you. So they'll they engage in the most incredible interpretation of evidence, and just effectively manufacture out of thin air, pull that out of their ass. Something that can be interpreted as a criminal or a somewhat criminal act. So they play both ways. But the point is that when the globalists want to go after January 6th, they make sure that radical activist judges hear the case to put these people in prison, and by again subverting the legal process. But on the other side, the activist judge gets to hear these cases of people who the globalists want to protect. And we can't allow this. It has to fucking stop. These judges are there to uphold and abide by the law, to employ facts and evidence in hearing these cases and determining guilt or innocence. And when there are prosecutors that are activists, judges that are activists, court administrative staff and employees that are activists, the whole thing is being subverted, and willfully so, and brazenly so. And for some reason that I don't understand, the Republicans in the United States and those who would uphold the Constitution seem to stand by, sort of bewildered and stunned, like they don't know what's happening. But it's obvious what's happening, and it has to be put a stop to. You've been attached to us today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.